5, 4, 3.
The Office is maybe the best example of a premise that is incredibly hard to pull off. The mockumentary. A genre with roots that have grown since the early 1960s, a mockumentary is a piece of entertainment that uses the pretense of a documentary to satirize the subject of the piece. Essentially, it's a fake documentary. You have mockumentaries like 1964's A Hard Day's Night. That was the first feature-length mockumentary that faked the lives of the Beatles over the course of 7 days. There's the vampire comedy What We Do in the Shadows, but these are films. They're a couple hours of narrative that lend themselves well to the immersion of the idea. It's very easy to believe in the documentary premise if you only have to do so for one sitting. The 2005 version of The Office gave a Michael Scott finger to what it meant to be a mockumentary and instead created around a set of principles or rules that the show would follow for nearly a decade. These were the rules of The Office. In order to make a good non-autobiographical documentary, the camera crew themselves should not detract from the subject or make themselves a recognizable presence at all. At least that's the traditional train of thought. Greg Daniels, co-creator and executive producer of The Office, did not take well to that idea. Rule 1 of The Office is that the camera crew are people too. Daniels once told Rolling Stone his goal was to direct the camera operators as if they were actors, since they were really in the scene as well. For instance, instead of saying start wide and then pan left and push in, he might say, "You know that Jan is jealous of Pam, so look for evidence of that, and make sure to check in on Dwight's weird date." He allowed the camera operators to take liberties, to act as though they were really in these situations and respond accordingly. Sometimes he'd even ask cameramen to close their eyes, spin around, and find the scene after. Now in theory, this could remove you from the show. It could add a weird, disjointing quality to the viewing experience and make you feel as though you're watching something that's less than organized. But the payoff ends up being the opposite almost in totality. The show's main cinematographer, Matt Sohn, was hired for his reality TV background, having just come off of shooting Survivor, and his experience gives The Office that unscripted feel. Knowing what to do with cameras in reality situations, it allows for moments like this.
Surprise! It's a joke! We were joking around! See? Okay, he was in on it. He was my accomplice, and there was just kind of a morale booster thing.
Where in traditional TV that dialogue spoken by Michael would have been caught on camera, here the camera stays on Pam, on the awkwardness and the anger, because one person, one camera, can only catch what matters to their eye. Using this principle, cameras will peek through blinds, follow cars, hide from sight, and this puts you in the shoes of someone who's really there. You're in the office because the camera is behaving like you would. This kind of engagement is something that's rarely implemented as well as it is here. But with this, you have to want to be there. Rule number 2 of The Office is that the subject has to be likable. Well, relatively. The original British version of The Office featured Ricky Gervais at his absolute driest and most unlikable, and it worked for a 12-episode miniseries, but this unlikability is simply not sustainable for much longer than that. The American Office came to the same conclusions shortly after almost seeing cancellation towards the end of season 1. Michael Scott was so unlikable that at times the show was genuinely hard to watch for those not looking for darker humor, something that's proven to be less palatable to American television audiences. Ken Tucker wrote in 2011 that from the start, Carell had to reinterpret Michael Scott as someone who could survive over the long haul. He couldn't be as petty or self-destructive as Gervais' creation had been. Gervais' boss was a short-fused time bomb, whereas Carell had to go more stealth. So, they made 3 changes heading into the second season. Most episodes would end with Michael being optimistic, he would be better at his job, and people would be slightly nicer to him. These changes allow you to maintain an interest in what could have otherwise been a mean-spirited and wholly disconnected character. Michael Scott had to be likable, and these changes went a long way to accomplishing that. But how do you deal with the rest of the personalities? Rule number 3, do not use talking heads as crutches. Exposition dumps, especially character exposition dumps, are almost never a good thing. There are ways to show information, to show personality, to understand a character without dumps of dialogue or narration that serve only that singular purpose. The Office relies heavily on talking head interviews, those moments where they're alone, often in the conference room talking to the camera, verbalizing their thoughts. These confessional moments very well could have been a hindrance on the show, but they're often used well enough that they become integral to the narrative. Take this scene.
And if he never comes back again, that's okay. We're friends. But you know what? It's okay. I'm totally fine. Everything is going to be totally fine.
Are you free for dinner tonight?
Yes.
All right. Then it's a date.
Here we get a bit of everything. We see Pam as a real person because we see her sit here and lie to her interviewer, mask her true feelings like any real person would, and we see this confessional moment as a moment of humanity. We don't get her inner thoughts, we only get what she wishes to tell us. But yet the information is still given like it would be given traditionally in other formats, without words, in her expression, in her mannerisms. Then we see that confessional interrupted for one of the most important moments in the show's history. We get the feel that these confessionals are a normal part of their everyday. They're all aware of them and have normalized them, and the office still functions around them. Sometimes nothing is said in these moments, sometimes it's just used for a punchline, but the talking head moments are not crutches for the writing, they're tools. Tools that help facilitate what is, in my opinion, the most important principle and rule the office seems to follow throughout its tenure. The show's greatest mockumentary principle, what really makes it such a great example of the mockumentary, is the way it uses its technical premise to bring you closer to the stories within. The Office is constantly using the camera crew to fill you, the viewer, in on things that only you know. And unlike a normal serialized show, the characters know you know, and they treat you, the conduit that the camera crew represents, differently as a result. For a while, only you know about Dwight's affair with Angela, and Dwight knows this and behaves differently in the office and to you, the cameras, in turn. Only you know the nature of Michael's relationship with Jan, and Jan's behavior shifts with that reality. Unlike so many other shows or pieces of entertainment, this principle that The Office employs brings you a much greater sense of attachment to these characters, because you feel as though you and them share these moments exclusively, this information, these stories. It's something very unique to the mockumentary style. It leads to payoffs like only you knowing about Jim and Pam's first kiss for so long, while the rest of the office is clueless. You're alone in knowing when they first get together, how Jim and Pam really get married when Pam's pregnant. The Office deploys this technique to manipulate your attachment to these characters and their stories, and it works beautifully. The Office was not an infallible show. It had its faults, it tapered off in quality after Steve Carell's exit, but over the course of 9 seasons, The Office took a simple premise and nearly perfected it. It took one of the worst testing pilots in network history and turned it into an institution. It never veered off the course it set itself upon, and it did so by staying true to the idea that built its foundation. In a small town in the middle of Pennsylvania, there was a bland office and a nondescript business complex. There's no smaller setting than that. That office filled with dysfunctional relationships, sociopaths, jingle writers, all being documented every day, and it works so well thanks to the rules of the office and the world's greatest boss. There have been and will be plenty of shows that attempt to follow in these footsteps, but replicating that path, that is an undertaking that will be even harder than you can imagine.
That's what she said?